I'm very happy to welcome you all to the inaugural John Wilmerding Symposium on American Art. I'm Rusty Powell, director of the National Gallery, and couldn't be more pleased to have you all with us. This new annual program, named for the gallery's distinguished retired curator, deputy director, trustee, chairman, and more, is made possible by a generous grant from the Walton Family Foundation. And we're very pleased to have with us the inspiration for the symposium, John Wilmerding, Sarofim Professor of American Art Emeritus at Princeton University, who is right here before you. John is a personal friend of just about everybody at the National Gallery, and it's great to welcome him back. He's a noted scholar of American art and cultural studies and is the author of monographs on Fitzhenry Lane, John Peto, Winslow Homer, and Thomas Eakins. Recently, he has moved forward in time and written books on Richard Estes, Robert Indiana, Tom Wesselman, and Roy Lichtenstein. John is recognized as one of the nation's leading authorities on American art. As a curator, historian, and benefactor, he has made contributions to the National Gallery of Art and the field of American art that have been nothing short of transformative. The 6 distinguished scholars who will present today have all been inspired by John's scholarship, as have so many of us in this auditorium. So please join me in welcoming John. And again, thank you very much. We would especially like to thank Alice Walton, trustee of the Walton Family Foundation, who is with us today, and the Walton Family Foundation for their generosity in making this program possible. And Alice is also with us today. So nothing can go wrong. Thank you. Now, it is my pleasure to invite our curator of American art, Nancy Anderson, to the podium, and Nancy will introduce our first speaker, and I think you have a wonderful afternoon ahead of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rusty. Our first speaker at this inaugural event is Mark Mitchell, who is appropriately one of John Wilmerding's former students. Mark completed his graduate studies at Princeton, where he earned both an MA and PhD under John's guidance. When I asked Mark about his days at Princeton with John, he recalled an afternoon encounter in the departmental office during his first year when John was enthusing over an article in the latest issue of Rolling Stone magazine. Ever the advisor, John told the newly arrived graduate student, "You've got to know what's going on." In sharing his recollection with me, Mark wrote, "Imagine my surprise to learn that my graduate advisor was much cooler and much hipper than I was." And then Mark added, "And naturally, he still is." Following his years at Princeton, Mark served in curatorial positions at the National Academy of Design Museum and at the Philadelphia Museum of Art before becoming, in 2014, the Holcomb T. Green Curator of American Paintings and Sculpture at the Yale University Art Gallery. Mark has organized exhibitions focused on several key 19th century figures, including Asher B. Durand and George Inness. And most recently, he organized the remarkable still life exhibition, Audubon to Warhol, The Art of American Still Life, at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. As a lender to that landmark exhibition, the National Gallery and its curators are much indebted to Mark and his colleagues for their deep research and fresh insights into paintings from the gallery's permanent collection, works now home and on view currently in the West Building. Mark has chosen Still Life and America as the title of his lecture this afternoon. Please join me in welcoming Mark Mitchell.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for that nice introduction, Nancy, and thank you, John, for your many contributions to my education and my career. It has been a great adventure so far, and with your help, I know many adventures lie ahead. My topic today is, as Nancy mentioned, a subject that I've worked a great deal on in the past 8 years, and she credits me for being at Yale a little longer than I have been. I just moved over last year, and that is the same year in which the exhibition opened in Philadelphia, and it was through the incredible collegiality of everyone here at the National Gallery, but all across the country, that we were able to assemble one of those projects that really brought together all of the anchors of the story that we wanted to tell. And it was a very special experience for me, and one that really proved to me the potential of continuing to tell stories of American art today that have relevance and no exceptions made for quality. It has been a very special project in my career, and one that has really, I think, pointed the way forward for me in my new position at Yale. The joy of still life is that it is one of those chapters or elements, themes of American art that is a real strength, which is to say that a disproportionate number of the great landmarks of American art history are in the genre of still life. And this is a reality that I think escapes us oftentimes. And so the opportunity to sort of train our attention on it helps us to appreciate how its history is unique within the wider story of American culture and artistic heritage. I start here with Charles Sheeler's Cactus of 1931. It's a very powerful picture for me because it sort of sums up the entire thesis of this project, which is to say that a still life is not just a painting of objects. It is a painting of objects in culture. Sheeler backs up from his cactus sitting on a beautiful Art Deco pedestal and shows us the trappings and the tools of his photographic studio in 1931. This is the very moment in which, as we learned from Charles Brock's great exhibition here at the National Gallery on Sheeler Across Media, that Sheeler turned from photography to primarily work as a painter. And in this painting, you get a sense of how the tools and the approaches of his photographic art influenced how the language and the approaches that he would use to painting for the remainder of his career. So it's a special work of art, one that's at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and therefore I got to spend a lot of time with in the course of developing the exhibition. And it really highlighted for me how Sheeler is not showing us that sort of finished product. The model here is still in the work lamps. The actual lights of the sort of feature moment of the photo shoot, the lamp at the right and the lamp overhead, have not yet been illuminated. Instead, we get this cold, stark light coming from the left and casting shadows across the sort of accordion element of the wall. But the window is blacked out, the Venetian blinds are drawn. There is a sense of real control of space and ordering of this composition that is a really special summary of these ideas and helps to kind of highlight how still life itself embraces so much beyond the frame. Raphael Peale's Venus Rising from the Sea, a Deception of about 1822 is another work of art that for me is a real anchor, and it helps us to define for ourselves the genre of still life from very early in its practice. And one of the things that for me this painting really highlights is how quickly still life matured in America. It sort of was born fully formed, and so it's like Athena from the cranium of Zeus. And so it is a very sort of unique moment to recognize how self-aware Raphael Peale is about the tools of still life and about how it tells stories for us in American cultural history. This is a painting of a painting with a kerchief over it. So it is a painting of an object, and we used this painting, I think, very effectively to introduce the exhibition. This was the first thing that you saw as you entered the Still Life exhibition in Philadelphia, so it kind of beckoned you in. And it tempted you, as it has tempted people for nearly 2 centuries, to go up and to try to lift the cloth, to peek at the naked lady, and to sort of indulge your prurient appetite for this great painting, which was itself quite well known, a picture by James Barry of Venus Rising from the Sea, that was very well known even in America during this period of the early 19th century. And so Raphael Peale, interestingly, and this is a nice nod to John, whose great Signs of the Artist book I love, Peale has signed this on the kerchief not on the painting behind the kerchief. So the illusion, what he called the deception, is his work of art. This is where he has decided to place himself in this painting as its maker. And so it is a rather striking object, and one that highlights for us how still life in America has had rather a different history, different than the other genres that have sort of evolved with our cultural timeline. And so for me, I think it's incredible that it emerges so quickly and matures immediately, and that over time it would continue to reemerge. It would have these episodic resurgences, during each period of which it would be fully mature upon appearance and then disappear again at the end of that time with the same speed. So it's striking to me that history should happen so in such a dense and concentrated form. That leads me to a discussion of the foundation of all of this. How did this come to be? And I find a very interesting root of still life painting America in Charles Willson Peele's family portrait that he begins to paint in 1772, shortly after coming back from London, where he was training with Benjamin West. And this is a picture that, for me, really describes how the experience of objects are set at the sort of foundational level of the experience of the world around us. It is an excellent reason why still life painting exists outside of other narratives of art in our culture, because still life portrays our experience of material things. There's very little between us and those objects except the artist's sensibility. So we encounter these paintings of objects as if encountering the objects themselves in that very same moment. That sense of immediacy is something that basically circumvents the classification of art in a significant portion of history, Western art history, and instead enables American viewers to encounter those objects and to interrogate them for themselves. It creates a very different form of experience. And in Charles Willson Peele's work, you see how here at the middle of the table, a group of still life objects, peaches and apples, are gathered in front of Peele's daughter, Eleanor, and she is reaching out to touch them while looking out at us. Recent scholarship has very nicely explored this painting and interpreted it in a way that I find very, very effective, which is to say as a hierarchy. Charles Willson Peele is a person who is very concerned with his legacy and someone who's very conscious of his own family's, both his family's support and his family's ability to carry on the vision that he has for American culture. So when he sets up his daughter Eleanor reaching out to touch the peach in front of her, across the table are her two uncles, St. George and James. You see James in the sort of ruddier jacket to his brother St. George's left, our right. And then over them, you see Charles Willson Peele with a wide embrace that sort of encompasses the entire group here at the table. Behind Charles Willson Peele, in turn, is a painting of the Three Graces, a sort of imaginary single-tone grisaille painting that Charles Willson Peele is at work on his easel. In between that imaginary level of experience and the immediacy of Eleanor's touch are the two uncles learning to draw at their brother's instruction, who's, as I said, just back from London and has all the authority carried with him of the Royal Academy to help them to learn and to advance in art. James, of course, would go on to a distinguished career in still life, but the incorporation of them here sets up a process, an evolution through the composition of the painting from touch of objects to portrayal of portraits to imagination of allegory in Charles Willson Peele's own picture on the easel behind him. So objects in this picture become the foundation of that hierarchy, of that progression from experience to imagination. The picture on the left, of course, you all know well and should go and visit early and often. It is a great picture and one that was certainly a centerpiece in our project in Philadelphia. It is the Rembrandt Peale portrait of his brother Rubens with a geranium from 1801. It is, I think, a very useful tool for our understanding of the relationships that we have vis-a-vis these objects and these paintings, because Rembrandt very nicely shows us how integral the relationship of his brother Rubens, the naturalist, is with his geranium plant here. He's reaching into the pot, sensing its moisture, making sure that it is not too wet, not too dry. And at the top, you see the geranium reaching back over to caress Rubens in return. There is a sort of reciprocity and actually a sort of similarity of scale between the two. Sometimes this is called a double portrait. With, I think, good insight, it might equally perhaps be called a double still life. The relationship between man and object of study is quite integral. The sense that the things that we work on, the things that we study, the things that we create are integral to who we are, that a portrait is incomplete without that engagement. And as we look at Raphael Peale, their brother's work, their elder brother's work at the right, the Great Blackberries from the de Young Museum in San Francisco, we see one of these objects that I think is the sort of quintessential work of this period. It is an object that so beautifully encompasses all of the aspects that we admire about this moment that it itself becomes a sort of anchor of appreciation. It does three things. It has a sort of very concentrated expression, but it also has a sense of descriptive scrutiny as well as a sort of contradictory but also engaging elusive symbolism. It seems to kind of go beyond being what it is, a group of berries in a bowl, and instead rise to a symbolic level. It sort of begs you to try to explain that it is something more than merely what we see. Raphael Peale is widely perceived and understandably perceived as a fountainhead. His work is regarded throughout American history and repeated by practitioners of American still life or cited by practitioners of American still life again and again as an anchor of practice. Well into the later 20th century, artists continue to recall Raphael Peale as their great inspiration. And so it's useful to contemplate how Raphael Peale is able to navigate between fields of science and art. He's able to sort of exist in this dual sphere, a sort of hybrid space between cultures, between looking at an object and describing it, which is really a sort of scientific approach to try to understand its nature and make sense of it, and an artistic approach to create a statement, an interpretation. And those two things were able to coexist in this first period of American practice that really lasts until the late 1840s. It's astonishing to see how consistently these artists have to navigate between these two fields of understanding. And that, to a significant extent, I think explains why still life is able to survive and also excel in this period of practice, because it makes meaning beyond a single discipline. This is Benjamin Henry Latrobe's rattlesnake skeleton from about 1804. This is one of those objects that really highlights the quality in Raphael Peale's painting that I was trying to describe before, that sense of a space between science and art. To most eyes, this would be a natural history illustration. It is a sort of very meticulous accounting for the individual ribs of the rattlesnake, the timber rattler that you see here. It is, however, an enormous drawing. It is this wide. It is nearly life-size, and it's two sheets joined together in the middle. You have an encounter with this drawing that is visceral. The hair on the back of your neck stands up. And I think that's to a significant extent because Latrobe brings you into the encounter with this creature as if alive. Timber rattlers travel in this sort of long moving arc as they sort of move their way across, sort of shimmy their way across the landscape. But when discovered, they coil up, raise the rattle, and open the jaws, which you see here beginning to happen. It's just been discovered. So Latrobe is drawing together the sort of momentary encounter with the nature, the sort of frightening nature of this animal. Even in absolutely deceased form, it nevertheless has an incredible vitality to it and expressiveness that in sort of direct proximity really brings forward a sense of its energy and its fearsomeness, one that gives you a sense of frisson in person that is almost impossible to describe. like John James Audubon, he's able to exceed the mandate of scientific description and characterization and reach into a field of artistic practice that is so compelling, so fascinating, that it very nicely becomes a demonstration piece for the richness of artistic practice in this moment in what I call the genre of still life. Latrobe is a very interesting fellow because he's also an architect, and this is the moment in which he is designing the Baltimore Cathedral, as well as an engineer, and he is the designer of Philadelphia's water system. So in the clarity of natural forms, the sort of natural order of them, Latrobe was able to find a sense of clarity of structure and order that he would seek to embody in neoclassical architecture. He was a famous naturalist as well as an architect, and that too speaks to Charles Willson Peale's experience, a sort of interdisciplinarity that is distant to us today, but one that was very much embraced at the turn of the 19th century. Latrobe said, "Had I been appointed to settle the ceremonial of the arts, I believe I should have given the precedence to the representation of the beauty of nature, and not to that of the actions of man." It's a sort of reordering of our appreciation of the natural world and the place of our artistic practice and attitudes towards art in early America that requires us to think a little bit differently about what these artists were trying to accomplish. And for me, it has really helped me to shape a whole project that unfolds from here. In the late 1840s, everything changed, like flipping a switch. The earlier practice of still life painting almost entirely disappeared. Even Rubens Peale, who picked up the brush late in life, would practice the second phase of still life painting in America rather than the first. And so it's remarkable to me that even within the same Peale family, that the influence of this cultural shift of the late 1840s would be so dramatic that even Rubens Peale could not resist it. At the left, you see one of the great works that John also helped to describe in his scholarship. This is Severin Rosen's Flower Still Life with Bird's Nest from 1853, one of the great pictures that the Philadelphia Museum of Art was able to acquire during the process of building this exhibition. And at the right, Christian Schussel's painting called Ocean Life, a watercolor from the Met, that very nicely brings together a sensibility of an aquarium, which would be, it was intended to be an illustration for James Somerville's study of the same title in 1859. These two paintings describe how in this era, an era that we called indulging, the aesthetic emphasis is no longer scientific and has shifted dramatically over to a sensual emphasis, vibrancy of color, of texture, of these sort of confections of nature. No longer is the natural order the reigning order. Instead, color, sensuality, richness, luxuriance. I even call it a sense of slight intoxication. And so if any of you had a glass of wine with lunch, you will recognize this a little bit differently than the rest of us. You'll probably have a much more appropriate experience of these paintings than the rest of us. But it gives you a sense of the sort of keenness of observation, the way that your senses are heightened by visual experience, by that sense of slight intoxication. And Rosen in particular is widely considered the sort of primary manifestation of this idiom. But Schussel's work too, I think, is very helpful because it describes how these objects belonged in the parlor, which is a new space in America. And these are conversation pieces. You're supposed to talk about what the symbolism of the flowers might be. What is the sort of meaning of that beautiful tulip, that yellow and orange and red tulip in the upper left of Rosen's painting? Well, there are all sorts of books and dictionaries published in the mid-19th century about the meanings of flowers, and none of them is definitive. The purpose is to talk. The purpose is to understand and to recognize and perhaps talk about literature that you know and to demonstrate a facility with knowledge, both religious knowledge as well as literary knowledge, through the explanation and discovery of these pictures. And similarly, in Schussel's work in an aquarium, that sort of confection of underwater life from all over the world stuffed together in a single aquarium, when undoubtedly half of them would have eaten the others by now. It's nevertheless an incredibly engaging, colorful, vibrant portrayal. He's not giving you nature, he's giving you color. He's engaging you and trying to get you to explore the experience of these things in a single composition. These are sort of encyclopedias compressed together for your enjoyment. Time shifts again after the Civil War at about around the centennial, around 1875-76. The aesthetic movement really takes hold. I really credit the centennial itself, though, with 10 million people coming to Philadelphia to see a very different America, a transformed nation that industry has converted into a place that manufactures objects. Things now become a sort of material product to explore, to trade, to collect. These fill homes from all over the world, objects from different times and different places. And the culture of discernment, and discerning is the culture of still life in the late 19th century that we used to apply to both the aesthetic movement works like Charles Carroll Coleman's beautiful picture of still life with peach blossoms from 1887 at the left, and William Michael Harnett's Old Violin at the right here at the National Gallery, another favorite. But this was an age of skepticism. People didn't believe their eyes. And so in these works of art, the viewer is invited to explore, to seek understanding and appreciation of both beauty and truth. These are related concepts in the late 19th century. To be able to recognize beauty, to have taste, to discernment, as well as to be able to recognize the truth of vision. These are the two idioms into which still life fits in the late 19th century. And we're able to kind of see them side by side, I think, for the first time by using that lens, as well as the sort of understanding of appreciation that really animates this time. Harnett in particular uses a Cremona violin of the 18th century, a very beautiful instrument. And so we're invited to admire the instrument and understand the mellowness of its tone, as well as to read the music from Vincenzo Bellini's La Sonnambula that's behind it. And so we can read these paintings, we can hear these paintings, and they speak to us through a level of invocation that is only accessible to those of us who are literate in these meanings and these cultures of objects. The early 20th century we called animating, and the disciplines of, or the sort of movements of surrealism and precisionism take up objects in similar ways, endowing them with mechanical and vital energy that are very much related. And so when you see George O'Keeffe's beautiful Two Calla Lilies on Pink from 1928 at the left, as well as Charles Sheeler's, I can only call it landmark, beautiful Rolling Power at the right from 1939, a painting developed as part of an illustration series for Fortune magazine on American industrial power. Both of them describe the movement, the energy of objects, and endow them with an incredible sensitivity that is quite compelling to us even today. And we have a beautiful selection Charles and his colleagues have put up in the Modernist galleries here in the East Building that I hope you'll go and see, of O'Keeffe's pictures that I find a beautiful summation. But that sense of vitality and poetry in nature very much comes forward over time in a way that I find most compelling really in the early 20th century. And Cubism is the thing that really pushes still life for the first time to the forefront of artistic consciousness. Still life becomes the vehicle for artistic expression and experimentation. It's a sort of prologue to abstraction. And so for artists like these, it becomes a vehicle to explore the forces of nature with greater immediacy. I end here with Jasper Johns' painted bronze of 1960. It's an object. He has cast his own brushes and turpentine can in bronze for us in 1960. And for me, the exhibition that we developed had a real natural endpoint in the later 1940s. The rise of abstract expressionism was sort of a break in the historical practice of still life that was taken up again in the 1960s. And Johns, in this object, really creates not just a compelling work of art using the language of trompe l'oeil. This is bronze that has then been painted to look like the real thing that was originally used. These are his own brushes awaiting his return. But he's created, bronze is the language of memorials and public sculptures and perpetuity. And so here we have Johns giving us the tools of art cast in bronze, themselves memorials to a historic practice of art. The pop period is very much contiguous, to my mind, with our present day. And so as we contemplate Johns' work, it gives us a chance to think about where we go next. For me, that really means understanding the historical eras that I described, those 4 periods of practice, and trying to understand why they stand apart from the evolution of American artistic culture more widely. And then secondly, to think about how genres make sense in America more widely, or not. We tend to lean on these European terms of the Renaissance as if they were very much alive and kicking in the United States throughout our national history. And to my mind, that's just not accurate. More often, an object sort of steps between these categories than into one alone. And the Still Life exhibition had a huge gamut of works that are conventionally termed portraits or genre paintings, the purposes of which were to animate those relationships to objects in each of the historical periods, to provide a sort of go-between between us and those things, to create more of a narrative. And so for me, to understand the relationship of the sort of softness of disciplines that Charles Willson Peale introduced, and that I think remains very much with us today, artists are driven not by genres or financial gain primarily. They typically are driven to do their work by a recognition in a certain form or style or subject of meaning, of opportunity, and of real self-reflection. And in Still Life, we have the opportunity to revisit perhaps the most denigrated of all of those classifications and look back now at the rest and say, is there something more there for us? Thank you.